In this video, we want to talk about what happens after you've facilitated the Socratic seminar. So students have discussed in groups for the allotted amount of time, and the seminar is over. So now what do you do? This is the process that I like to think of as kind of the self-correction process. I like to call it the debriefing process. And it's really valuable because after the seminar, obviously you don't just drop it and kind of move on and do something else. You want to talk about, how did the seminar go? What were the problems? What were the difficulties? What do we need to do to make the seminar better? So the best time to do that, of course, is right after the seminar is over. So in this fairly short video, I just want to talk to you about what I do in terms of after the seminar. What do we do once discussion is over? Like I said in a previous video, we have obviously rules written out for seminar and kind of rules in place, and especially the first few seminars, I like to go over the rules at the beginning of class to make sure that everyone kind of knows what the rules are and that we're all conscious of the rules during the discussion. But that doesn't mean that the discussion will necessarily follow those rules. So one of the things that I like to do is after the seminar is over, I like to open it up to especially the group that was watching the discussions. From past videos, I use an inner-outer circle method called Socratic circles. So after one group is discussed in their inner circle and the other group has kind of watched them in the outer circle and filled out an outer circle kind of assessment sheet, I like to ask the outer circle, okay, so how did that discussion go? Let's look at the rules again and look at how the discussion went. First of all, were all of the rules pretty well in place during that seminar? And then, of course, were there any other difficulties or good parts about the discussion, whatever it was? And it's often the case that we find out that a particular rule might not have gone terribly well. So it might be, listen respectfully, and maybe there was a heated disagreement during the seminar. So the outer circle will usually point that out if you give them a chance to say, okay, let's think about what happened in the discussion relative to these rules, what happened. They usually point that out. But here's where there's a lesson to be learned about facilitating the seminar itself. It's very tempting as a teacher when you see a rule not kind of being enforced or actualized in the conversation to jump in and kind of immediately fix that problem. But my philosophy is that it sometimes needs to get worse before it gets better. So unless there's some obvious reason why there's chaos ensuing in the seminar, there's a safety concern or something like that, I like to sit back during the seminar. So even if there's a heated discussion and people aren't listening respectfully, or even if there's one person monopolizing the conversation, I like to sit back and sort of trust that after the seminar is over and we debrief, it's almost inevitable that someone in the outer circle will bring it up. And if they don't bring it up, I'll bring it up and say, okay, here's one thing that I noticed in the discussion. Does anyone kind of agree with this, disagree with this? Did anyone else see it as kind of problematic? Once the discussion is over and you debrief and you do that relative to the rules, you've given the outer circle and maybe the inner circle a chance to reflect on their performance. One thing I like to do is kind of keep notes. For each debrief, I like to keep notes about what people said about that Socratic seminar. And the reason I do that is because once they do that and we come into the next class and we do the next Socratic seminar, I can bring up the notes that we had from last class. So I'll say, okay, so if you remember from last time, here's the things that we said didn't go well about last class's discussion. So when we review the rules before this discussion, let's review what went wrong last discussion so that we can really try to improve on that. And then, of course, in turn, once that discussion is over, then I can say, okay, we had this problem last class. We tried to fix it this class. How did it go? So this way, students are really getting in the habit of really not only participating in the discussion, but watching and monitoring themselves and others in participation so that we can all improve the process. And again, this is important because if I just kind of retweak the rules and create new rules as I see fit, it's going to seem like it's more a discussion that's imposed by me than it will a discussion that everyone is participating in. Also, it obviously helps with things like critical thinking or metacognition. Another thing that I like to do when the discussion is over is I like students to kind of finish with some sort of piece of reflective writing. So let's say that I opened up the discussion with a really broad or meaty question that started the discussion. I might ask people to kind of write about their view on the answer to the question, or to kind of answer the question in some sort of short essay that might bring up maybe one or two things that occurred in the discussion, either that they agree with or disagree with. Or another writing prompt that I like to use is, and I tell them this in advance, when you're in the discussion, take note of one or two things that you disagreed with from other people that you didn't get a chance to respond to. And then at the very end of the class, once we're wrapping up, is them writing about those one or two things. So now that you have a chance on paper to respond to one of those things, what was one thing you heard in the discussion that you wish you could have responded to? Write your answer. And that's also good because it shows that people were kind of paying attention during the discussion. Not everyone necessarily speaks during the discussion, depending on how you set up your requirements and expectations. So that kind of reflection at the end is a nice little summary. But kind of use your discretion. Figure out what you think a good summary would be so that students can, on paper, demonstrate their understanding and what they got from the discussion at the end. So just in close, those are the two things that I like to do after the discussion is over. Number one, make sure we debrief as a group about the discussion relative to the rules of the discussion and stuff like that. And number two, maybe finish with some sort of reflective writing or something like that kind of ties up everything about the discussion at the very end of class.